our guest.
No, thank you, Amy. Yeah, as Amy said, our first guest is going to be with Strong Schools Maryland. Before I pass the mic to Riya, I just wanted to read a quick bio about who she is, what she's about. So Riya, she is the executive director of Strong Schools Maryland. She recently earned her master's in public health from Johns Hopkins, where she focused on equity in Baltimore's 21st Century School Buildings program. Passionate about high quality, safe education for all students, Riya brings her background in public health, data, and her experiences in Baltimore City schools to drive accessible, equitable change. So welcome, Riya, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amy and Javons and all of the committee for being here. I'm gonna just share my screen and drop one thing in the chat. So let's do that and we'll get all set up for this presentation. But good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. I just want to first thank you for inviting us to be here for this important conversation. My name is Riya Gupta. I am the executive director of Strong Schools Maryland. And I'm here today to talk and share communication strategies that school systems can adapt and engage communities authentically and truly, that make people and communities feel seen, heard, and invited into these really important conversations. Before we get into it, if you're not familiar with Strong Schools Maryland, hello. We are a statewide education advocacy organization invested in the full funding and faithful implementation of the blueprint. Before we get into the presentation, I want to give a huge shout out to my team, Kenzie Funk, our policy advocate, and Kalia Harris, our digital comms associate. Us three together make the magic that you're about to see on screen happen. So I just want to give a huge kudos to them. In short, before we get into the conversation, Strong Schools Maryland, together with communities, we advocate, build power, and share resources to bring people together to co-create strong public schools. And in the end, we do envision a Maryland that leads the nation in equitable student outcomes, equitable school funding, and empowered stakeholder engagement. So this is why community engagement is really important for our mission. I'm going to talk for like around 10 minutes, and then I know we have a lot of time for questions, so feel free to put them in the chat or as you think about them. I've also dropped a resource link in our chat, to kind of walk through any links that I might be referencing, so just for ease of access. I want to ground us in what meaningful community engagement is before talking about our considerations, lessons learned, and examples. Most of you have probably seen a version of this cycle in some informal way or in another form. But when we talk about meaningful community engagement, it truly is a cycle, right? It's a practice and it requires intentionality. When we tackle this at Strong Schools, this cycle, we mainly do that in three buckets of engagement, which we're going to show examples of later. But the buckets are bidirectional information sharing, consultation and collaboration, and then capacity and power building. And all of these activities separately and together are how we build the cycle of meaningful engagement. They all fit in. And if we didn't complete one of these pieces or two of these pieces, it would be the community engagement we do would be wholly incomplete. And I just want to stress that. And you'll see the circles of work that we do and how they kind of intertwine, in this presentation. And I apologize for the sniffling. I think I'm about to get sick. So, but first, I want to say that over the years, we have learned a lot about how to communicate, with communities. And one thing that we've learned is how we communicate is just as important as what we communicate. So we kind of diluted some high level considerations for developing a effective engagement strategy at the local school level. So I'm just going to walk us through these. First, one of the most basic things is knowing your audience. So every community member comes to the table with a different level of knowledge, experience, and time, perspective, all of that. Some are really familiar with education policy, while some are just trying to understand how decisions affect their child or their classroom. Some people have the time to sit through 2-hour meetings, while others have 5 minutes between jobs. If we don't account for those differences, we are going to lose people before they even have a chance to participate. That leads into our second consideration with it, which is accessibility and equity. It's simply not enough to send out one newsletter, host one meeting, and call it engagement. True accessibility means offering multiple ways in. We do that in written materials, visuals, video, oral updates, social media, in-person, virtual conversation. This also means making sure materials are available in the languages that your community speaks. If you're the community you work in is speaks Spanish or another language, your material should also be available in that language. And also, events should be scheduled at times when families can actually attend. And that tends to be maybe outside typical traditional working hours. One thing that we really learned, the third consideration, is being honest and saying what you mean. We learned very quickly you can't sugarcoat or hide behind jargon. It truly erodes trust. When we are clear and transparent, even when the news is hard, and oftentimes the news is hard, um, it shows respect and builds that trust because people inherently just want the truth. This fourth piece is something that you'll see in all our materials that we send out is engagement must be actionable. Information without a next step is just kind of noise. People should never leave a meeting or a communication wondering like, so what? Or asking that question. They should know exactly they can do, whether that's attending an event, completing a survey, speaking out and speaking at a hearing, or just like sharing information with a neighbor or concerned community member. And then this last piece, the fifth consideration is something that we have all the time. No one is perfect. It's the idea of having a mindset of continuous improvement and learning. We have to do, we have work to do because community engagement is an ongoing practice. And that can only happen if we keep listening, adjusting, and growing. And what that means is evaluating what works, owning what didn't, and being willing to try new approaches. This is super important. There are going to be mistakes in communication. What you do next is the most important. Um, the process and considerations of engagement are inseparable from outcomes. When we really believe that when the process isn't equitable, our decisions won't be, and that's why like this work that you are doing at Pillar 5 in this committee is so important. Now let's get to the fun part. Um, with the time that like I want to talk for the rest of the 5 minutes, I guess that we have with me talking is I want to talk through some examples of our engagement strategies. All of them again are linked in that document that I shared. And first is that bi-directional information sharing. For us, that means utilizing newsletters. That's both monthly newsletters and then during the legislative session from January to April, that's weekly legislative newsletters, social media, one-pagers, and dashboards. So this is a snippet on the left is a snippet from one of our most recent newsletters. Um, and in every newsletter, we aim to give like these 10-minute education updates with some of the largest education news from the month. And a lot of the news that we share can be dense. So what we do in these newsletters is aim to break it down in snippets that are digestible. So last month, the state board released MCAP results, and we wanted to share that with our communities. So in our process of sending out our newsletter, we broke down what the MCAP is, aka how communities and parents might see it show up in their students' schools. And then we talked about our major highlights and takeaways, and then some reminders about this data. Because a lot of times when you kind of truncate large issues, you lose the nuance that is needed, right? MCAP is just one measure, right? Progress takes time. Those are things that ground people in the reality of this work and also ground expectations. Um, We also always add like buttons. So we had people and we encourage people to look and explore the local level data and also gave a heads up to expect student reports to be out on September 12th. So you can explore our newsletter on our website. We do send it out through email, which is the best format to get it, but it's always available on our website as well. This is just one snippet of how we kind of digest our and send education updates through our newsletter. Next thing I want to touch on is our social media, which has blown up in the last year because of the great work that Kalia does. This media source tends to be more on the go. This is the way that we share quick actions that are easily shareable. And we do aim to break things down in a way more simple format and provide the context that might be needed in links in our bio. So if someone wants to dig in deeper or take an action, that's all available in our bio. One thing that we've really recognized is social media is an incredibly fast way to get the word out. And it is not as time consuming as maybe building a newsletter. This is also one of the best ways to engage students. We have engaged students on social media more than on any other platform. So if you're looking to get feedback from students or get students to an event, putting it on social media and engaging also with their content is really imperative. And we can always look at social media and talk more about that in the question section. Um, the next thing that we do in terms of information sharing is through one pagers. That's one of our one pagers is posted on the right side of the slide. And usually we make one pagers that explain a single topic. And it can vary in the depth, but it always is grounded in the impacts on students. So this is, for example, one pager we made regarding the potential cuts to collaborative time. And this talked about the impacts on student, what it was, and like talked about key students impacted. We linked a few of our other ones on that key resources page. One thing I really want to talk about is something really exciting that was released this summer, and it's our recently released data dashboard. This data dashboard was actually the process of that community engagement and is a response to our network's hope for more transparency in blueprint-related data. Our wonderful summer intern, Izzy, pulled together publicly available data and tried to really give a snapshot of some of the intersectional data by pillar in the blueprint. And the beautiful thing about this dashboard, and I really urge you to click around and test it out, is that this isn't just data posted on a website. You can interact with it. There are definitions, there's the data sources, there's key takeaways, and even videos of Izzy walking you through how to use the dashboard and interpret the dashboard, right? It's the multi-level of engagement and information sharing that allows people, if they don't know how to read this, they can just look at the key takeaways and play around a little bit. Or if you really want to dig in, you can also dig in. These are the small and but meaningful ways to move information sharing to that capacity building work that we hope to do. But as we talked about in the community engagement cycle, information sharing is just the start. So this is on the bottom of the slide, this is another form of that cycle that I shared. And if we look, information sharing is really only that second step of informing. So we really focus on these next three steps also. Um, Engagement means collaboration and empowering, and we do a lot of this in different forms. We do, for example, monthly education calls with anybody in the community who's interested in sharing what they're seeing in their communities, and we share statewide updates and actions. We also host community conversations where we can get feedback actively throughout the year. We do workshops and skill building sessions, right? There's a lot of barriers to getting involved in this work, whether that be like testimony and public comment. We break down those barriers. And we also do a lot of youth leadership work. That's the base of a lot of the things that we do. We're doing this for students, so why not capacity build with students and help them build the skills that they need to advocate for themselves. So we do a lot of different forms of collaboration and empowering, but one thing that we've realized is like this is truly cyclical because hearing the needs, experience, and perspectives straight from the communities during these sessions allows us to better refine our information sharing to support them. That's how like things like the data dashboard were created. And it allows us to be better receptive and more nimble on our feet throughout the year and really make sure that the things that we do are meaningful for the people that we serve. Um, so I just want to close out and reiterate thank you for having us. And that if we want equity in student outcomes, we also have to start with equity in how we communicate. We are happy to support school systems to adapt our approaches in your own work. And I just want you to know that Strong Schools Maryland is here as a partner, and we're here to help. And thank you again for having us. And any questions are we're happy to answer.
Riya, thank you so much for sharing both the intention and the practices that you've engaged with, as well as the evolution of how those practices started. You've built trust with families around the blueprint, and I'm curious from your perspective, what's one lesson from your approach that LEAs can borrow right away? Like, what's something that they can go to your website, they can replicate? What would you recommend? And then I'm going to pass it to Dr. Prime, who also has a question.
That's a great question, Amy. And I wouldn't say they could grab this straight from our website, but it is a simple fact of listening. And I think both Rachel and Arshia mentioned this. When we are building relationships with communities, our first thing is not to talk about the blueprint. We don't talk about the blueprint. We don't go straight to the policy. We ask a grounding question. What do you expect from your schools? What are your hopes for your school? What are you experiencing in your schools? And we do that with students. We do this with parents. We do this with communities. It builds that trust, but it also helps us learn about the communities. Like what are you hoping for? Because then we can also point to the blueprint and say, this is what is going to support that, but also understand like where are the gaps? What do we need to advocate for beyond the blueprint? So I would say listening is just so key. And sometimes we get so wrapped up in like educating about the blueprint and all of that that we need to just take a step back and say, what do you want? And how can we build from there? Super important.
Thank you for that perspective. Dr. Prime, you had a question? You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and for the really comprehensive approach that you're taking to communicating. My question is, what level of participation are you getting from parents in those feedback sessions? And have you noticed a particular profile of which parents are getting involved?
That's a really great question. And I want to mention that engagement really depends, and that's why we do so many different forms of engagement. So for example, for our community conversations, we've had around like a good 30 or so folks from across the state come to those conversations and be active participants. But when we follow up with the people who've registered, we end up getting a lot more maybe one-on-ones. We have a lot of parents who actually contact us one-on-one. Maybe they feel a little bit uncomfortable sharing their thoughts in a public setting. So we always make that option available for folks where they can talk about the issues that they're seeing in their school community. privately with us. But then we see things like our survey. We released a survey in the beginning of the summer, and that got around like 450 responses. And I can pull up the breakdown, but I do know a large majority were family and parents. So there are a lot of parents that want to get engaged, and the good thing that we've been seeing is there is huge diversity in why the parent is engaged and also where they are in the state. We have had state parents from all the way from Western to Eastern to Southern to the capital region. It's incredible to see all these parents come together and talk about the issues that they're seeing in their communities and how it relates back to the state level.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Lou.
Yeah, thank you, Rhea, for their presentation. Kind of follow up to Dr. Prime's question. Can you speak more specifically about your work and how your engagement has specifically with like multilingual families and all that?
Yeah. So this has been something that we're growing in as well. With limited capacity and funds, it's sometimes hard to do the type of engagement that we're hoping for. But a big way that we've been able to engage multilingual families and students is through partnerships. There are folks that like CASA. I'm going to give a huge shout out to CASA. That they have translation services. They'll translate. They translated our survey for us, right? And they did it in Spanish and French. They'll connect you to a translator for a workshop that you're doing. And they'll really work with you to support how to best support multilingual students. But that doesn't just have to be CASA. There are plenty of organizations in your local context that are doing that work. And what I would say is really rely on them to and partner with them, right? How can you support them and how can they support you? And I think there's a lot of possibilities for partnerships. And I do like it better because then, there's a lot of work happening with AI and Google Translate and all that stuff, but grounding it in community and the translations and the context that is happening in your school system is super important. So I would really urge school systems to look at who is working with multilingual families in your county and partner with them, see how you can better make your materials and your engagement accessible to those families.
Thank you.